Greg and Dennis. Actually,
Dennis can't be here because he's trying.
Greg's supposed to come.
Okay.
Yeah, the Wisconsin first.
All right, we are live.
1 second. Just don't get my glasses.
Sure.
Good morning. It is May 17th, and this is a special meeting of the Darien Board of Education Communications Committee. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 21st. We have a few items on the agenda this morning, and I am stalling for a second while we wait for Dr. Adley to get back in the room. He had to run and grab something. And here he comes, and I'm going to turn it right over to him.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Laura in person. Good morning to you. Good morning, Ms. McCown. So I think you just turned it over to me, Madam Chair. Yes, okay, thank you very much. Okay. So we have two items on the agenda. The first one being the policy, and the subcommittee spent some time looking at various policies from various districts. I reattached, just kept them attached just for your reference, because those are the ones that primarily we had sort of like focused it down towards, even though none of them have been selected like as one to take. They were just ideas. So leaning into this, the takeaway was that there was, at least our takeaway was, it was different. Certainly the committee can revisit the matter to talk about a sort of more concise, focused but general sort of policy that would be helpful to have a policy that talks to communication. We have a communication committee for a particular purpose. It just seems that we should have some policy informing either the operations of the overview or the philosophy. What we discussed the last time were tenets or principles or big takeaway ideas. I thank you to those members of the committee that forwarded ideas on that. So we just distilled those ideas. We can differ on them. We can say, where did those come from? We can say, you maybe forgot one. We can add to them. We can take away from them. But the general sense was that at some point we may go back to the full board to ask the policy committee to develop a policy about communication, and instead of going from a blank piece of paper to share that we have looked at some policies and some from the actual focus groups and everything else actually that's been discussed at this table. The tenets of a policy would include the following essentially, and ask the board to charge the policy committee to do that. So that's kind of where we are with that. And these are the following principles or tenets that we glean from the feedback. And I won't read them all there. They're just bulleted at the bottom. Can you get that up there, please? Thank you. So those are the tenets of guidance to the policy committee. And this morning we're just looking for discussion. Are we capturing it right? Is this what we want to do? That's what we thought was the takeaway from the last meeting. And at some point we have to decide whether do you want anything in policy or not. We did say that the other policies, if you recall from the last meeting, the other policies, we would just address those. Any of the other policies that had communication embedded somewhere along the way, we would just charge it. We don't even need to charge the policy committee. They'll just do that as a part of their normal work as it comes through the actual audit process and revision process. So that's the nature of this item.
So we're looking at this, Dr. Adley, as language that we would like to propose the board provide to the policy committee with direction to look at drafting a policy that might address these items. We're not saying that these have to be in there, right? These are things that we want the policy committee to consider.
That it would speak to two-way communication, for example. And if the policy committee in its wisdom thinks it wants to add, delete, alter before it brings to the board, that's because the board may suggest things too.
Right, or point out where it exists already and perhaps
Yeah.
they feel it's covered, et cetera. So should we have some discussion then around these bullet points to see if anyone feels like there are any glaring omissions or things that we would not want to include to take this forward to the full board? Uh,
Is that a question for me or to the group? Or
Sorry, I
just
guess that was
reflective?
to you, but I meant it for a group
Well,
question.
yeah, because there's some, like, for even the first one, and it's sort of like, okay, what does this really mean though? Well, you could say, Alan, you put it on, right? You distilled it from it. Yeah, but I'm just also trying to just sense like, we thought that that's what people were saying, but I'm trying to understand like, what did that actually mean? It may just mean what it says,
Are
but
you talking about the facilitation
Yeah,
of meetings
yeah,
principle?
right.
Oh, okay.
I'm thinking it maybe means more in general, provide more opportunity and ensure that there is it's of a two-way sort of give and take type thing as opposed to just a meeting for people to be told stuff. That's what I'm
Right.
thinking. But
Um,
admittedly, I left it there just seeking a wee bit of clarification myself.
and from a policy standpoint, I'd say our 9,000 series, there are a few policies in there that sort of define what the responsibilities are for having meetings and when to have meetings and how to call for a meeting, et cetera. So I guess what we want to suggest here is there something from a communication standpoint that isn't presently covered in that? And the answer might be no, but just to frame that a little more specifically to the communications angle of it.
Can I
Yeah, Robin,
just weigh
please.
in on this? And I mean, it's helpful for me to actually look at some of the sample policies
Yes.
as we have this
Right.
discussion. Because as I was kind of looking at these overall very broad, high level guidelines, it made it a little bit harder for me to kind of say, well, how would that actually translate into a policy that we could that would provide very clear guidelines about what we should do. And what I noticed is that, for instance, with the New Canaan policy, and I know I don't want to get into the details, but generally the examples that we were given, I thought left it a little bit more undefined, which I thought was important because the concern I would have about getting too specific in all of these different bullet points would be that you don't want to box yourself in terms of how you're going to communicate with people. But I thought what New Canaan actually had I thought that they really did a good job with talking about the partnership that, to facilitate open and regular communications. And they kind of left it at that and then said, and I mean, some of these were, encouraging the staff, encouraging the administration to create opportunities for a two-way communication. And I think just to leave it a little bit more broad in terms of the overall policy, just from a legal standpoint, maybe is a good thing for us. And then the details can be worked out depending on the situation at each individual school or the staff and, what works for the parents. And, we obviously have improvements that we need to make, but I don't know if I would want a policy that is so specific necessarily, because you don't want to limit yourself either.
I would agree. I feel comfortable saying that I think the policy committee would avoid that too. And that would be
Okay.
their goal, to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a position where we're trying to live up to something that is too specific and too much room for error. It should be more.
But I like these overall kind of
Okay.
philosophies. I think that this really,
Captures.
in my view, this kind of achieves the main points, I think.
Thoughts, Grant?
Yeah. So I thought this was a good document. In terms of the points, as I was reading through, there was a couple things that I felt like were potentially missing. And as it related to communication, it didn't seem like there was specific mention to that in terms of I'm just thinking about we've had a few discussions recently about our cadence. Like what's the cadence with the faculty, with the administration and with our meetings, and just what should our communication with Dr. Adley, with the teachers, with all how should that be factored in here? I just felt like that was sort of missing. This seemed like it was more geared towards like just broader communications and communications with the public
Community.
or with the community. But we're missing a key constituent there, which is maybe the most important, which is teachers and the administration.
And Julie, can I add to that? I think Greg brings up a really good point because I had that in my initial notes. I think looking at the surveys, there was no survey question that asked about the satisfaction of parents with communication with faculty. It just talked about satisfaction with communication with the Board of Ed and with the district or the administration. And we did get in the very detailed survey feedback in the fall, many different comments from parents that they felt that in some ways there was some missing feedback loop, especially at the middle school and high school level, between parents' ability to hear from teachers or to kind of have that communication. And that's more of a district and an operational kind of, to-do item potentially. But I think our policy should, to Greg's point, kind of also talk about, we want to have that kind of loop and feedback opportunity for parents.
And the intention of that is not more necessarily, because sometimes more is less, but just some, right? And I think that we need to have a broader conversation with our strategic plan about like, what is the cadence of our general communications, which goes into all of this. But, and I would include meetings within that in terms of the communications, because every meeting is a public communication effectively. So just thinking through that and like how we're utilizing time and how the public is receptive to that or even able to receive that given the cadence that we've got.
And just one, we also got feedback from teachers in those detailed surveys that they felt that they were missing an opportunity also to, I guess, have some kind of a interaction with the Board of Ed. And I don't know, what has been done in the past, if anything, or how you can facilitate that aspect of it as well. Because that's not much more, I don't know how you would actually make that happen, but I did get the sense just from the comments that was something that some, teachers did feel that they would like that opportunity. And I don't know when that could happen or how.
So if I'm taking both of those comments, where I would put that would be under the communications policy. You could, it comes up in a couple of places. One, you could put it to two-way communication with the community and staff. You can literally just ask
All
staff that,
stakeholders.
right? Like you just,
Right. That's a good point.
if it's a big thing on the focus group feedback too, it talks about, face-to-face opportunities, to increase those opportunities. So the action steps to those could be increasing those opportunities with all constituents type thing. So for clarity, you can put some clarity in it, if you wish. I will say just not as a stumbling block or being abstinent or otherwise, we have to be careful actually. And it seems like a strange word to use, but the opportunity, what does that look like in terms of for anything from our community members to our staff members to be having forums? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to think about how we do that though, particularly if we're having meetings with the staff type thing.
Right. And I would add too, I think it's a great point to bring up and discuss. I think some of it we'll discuss more when we get into sort of the buckets or the next part of our meeting. Greg, I think you mentioned some of it is a little more operational in nature, what we're talking about. And I think some of it is probably wrapped up in this, making sure people understand what the opportunities are and what mechanisms are out there to communicate and to get information better than they might presently understand them. So I understand where you're going from a policy standpoint, but I also think this is something we want to make sure we talk about as we look forward and figure out how we're making all of this work better for all stakeholders.
Yeah, totally. And I almost think about it as like, Dr. Adley, you're the one in charge. Like what, if you had a blank piece of paper and you restructured how this looked in terms of board communication, what would it look like? What would the meeting cadence look like? What would the subcommittees look like? Like, how would this all look? Because a lot of this has been over the years, I think we've created subcommittees ad hoc. And so like, from your perspective, what should this look like in a perfect world? And it's not going to be perfect, but like, from your perspective, how would that look?
Do you mean organizationally with the board structures and so on?
Maybe not board structures, but like just from a communication perspective, right? So we have meetings very regularly. Those meetings are effectively our communication with the public. There's other communications, like our chairman Jill has basically primary responsibility for communication
Yes.
with you and with the rest of the faculty. Like, how do you think that should look like from your perspective? How does it look for other, schools in the district? Like, I think that would be very
So-
helpful to understand.
I'll go around that a wee bit and I'll give an example. Like for instance, the curriculum committee. Yeah, it's not answering your question, but I'll just give it as an example. I actually think that's a very positive development to have in the district. And I think the addition of that creates an automatic forum for communication from the public and everything from curriculum to instructional practice to assessments to, and I think that has been a very healthy thing. And I think I'm actually surprised we didn't have that in place. So I think that's a very, very positive development. That actually, and in some cases you could say that came out of community from a grassroots, like we'd like to hear more about it, and therefore we responded to that. The board responded to that. You're inviting me into this conversation, so you have to be careful what the answer you get back a wee bit. So I'll be tentative about this in terms of the superintendent and the board chair are primarily the people who should be speaking for the district. They also should be the people that people should be speaking to, right? So sometimes with rules and regulations of how we communicate or how we don't communicate with those. Look, when board members, for example, I'll just look, you're asking an honest question, I give an honest answer back. If board members talk to staff and so on and so forth, that's not a good thing. If you want a structure to talk to staff, then we should create those structures, right? But those types of things back and forth aren't particularly helpful. And you asked me honestly, I can't give you anything but an honest answer back, Greg. So I would look for structured ways to do those types of things. Now, there has to be opportunities for board chair or other ways to liaison with the leaderships of the various teachers and administrative groups. So those are in place, and they should continue to utilize those particular arenas. I think that from this type of setup, Zoom, to continue to use Zoom, right, which there's not many districts right now that continue to use Zoom as options for our parents. I think sometimes we give ourselves a bad rap just because we say that communication, the actual feedback from the overall feedback from the actual survey itself was generally there was a level of satisfaction. Yes, there were groups of people or constituents who had like improvements from the way we send emails or from my emails to make sure they're embedded in the email itself as opposed to a PDF. Yes, okay. So I've tried to do that where I can. But in general, there was a level of recognition of communication. I'm rambling a wee bit, but I'm just giving you some thoughts because I don't think it's all that broken, right? In many ways, right? So the systems we have for I can't see constituents saying that there's no vehicles for people to communicate. I just think that from the board's organization, the structures you have in place are as good as any. In fact, people say to me, "You're still doing what? Right? Your board are still doing online meetings with people," and that's been a very, very inclusive. And you could say, and there's pros and cons to that too. Well, if people want to participate in the democratic process, show up and participate, right? Don't make it easy for people. I think there's a difference between making it easy and being reasonable and recognizing our goal is bigger than making it awkward for people. And I think the board has done a very nice job doing that. So I'll leave it at that. That doesn't answer your question completely, Greg.
Can I chime in
Yeah,
sort of a little bit too, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Adley, but as I understand it, as we agree to sort of these broader bucket areas, I think part of your hope is that your team gets to go and do some work on this and come back to us with a little more of, based on what we learned, these are some of the things we're going to take, to an operational level and look at things that way. And here are some things that we'd like to continue to work on with the board and this committee, to sort of flesh out a little more specifically what you were saying, like what are the answers and what are the ideal ways to be doing some of this? And is that a fair?
Are you transitioning now into the focus group feedback?
Well, I think Greg's question gets into that a little bit, so I'm
Yes.
sort of talking about it all together, but as we wrap up this phase, so to speak. I think.
Yeah,
I
we would
think
have
your
to.
goal is to spend some time working on how this gets addressed.
We would, the buckets that we put these into were, buckets we thought sort of it flowed into a wee bit. We forced a couple in here and there. But we would end up having to, the board's asking what are the priorities and what are we working on? This would end up being something else we would have to work on, right? In terms of strategy, actions. What, Greg, one of your questions, and I appreciate the question. What would prove that we were, what's our metric to show that we've made a difference here? So I'd like that to be very clear up front because like, not right now, but so that's the work that we would have to do work here on this, and it sort of falls into, again, strategies and actions and measurements.
Right. Jill has a question.
Just a little bit of a question for the committee. When we were talking about stakeholders, we have community mentioned, we talked about staff, administration. My question is, do we feel that students are adequately covered here? Do you want them covered in this list of, we have board reps. We have talked before about student surveys for things that are very student driven in terms of decision making. So
I think student voice is important. And there's different ways of doing that. Yesterday I went into a middle school class and talked about cell phone use and took a random poll of kids on certain things, and there's different ways of getting it, right? Different forms of getting it. But I think look, ask the kids, they'll tell you what's happening, right? I mean, generally speaking, at the high school or middle school, they'll give you a good perspective.
I think that's a great add. Sorry, great add.
Yeah, and to be clear, yeah, I wasn't looking for an answer right now to my question. That was like setting.
Well, I didn't give you a coherent one. That's okay.
It was,
thoughts.
I'll give you a wee bit.
Julie put it better, like, it's like, this is the work that needs to be done. Framing up the work is really what we're trying to do.
Bingo. I think that hits it. Okay, so we talked about kind of making sure that we build in consideration of all stakeholders in the directional language that we give, that we bring to the board to hopefully take to the policy committee. Any other questions or comments on these? What do we have, 7 bullets as they're laid out with that piece worked in?
The transparency thing just is, again, I don't put it down to be in any way confrontational about it, but it's just the working understanding of what we mean by that can be different from one person to another. In principle, yes, people like, because a converse sort of like implies that we're not being forthright as opposed to being transparent. So at some point it doesn't have to be now and stuff, but at some point maybe even the policy committee can wrestle with it.
Give a thought, Jill.
yeah, I think I would reword that. I think that our goal is transparency. There are multiple ways to accomplish that. Back to that point of what's the policy and what's the operational decision. EduPlanet, for example, is a form of communication and transparency that, isn't regulated by policy necessarily. So, but I do think from a policy perspective, setting out that that's our framework, striving towards transparency in our operational is, I probably would reword it in that direction. That's my suggestion.
So reword it in the direction of
That the goal
is transparency in communications to build
Not-
go ahead.
sorry, not of communications, but that our communications are used to create optimal transparency.
Okay, that's a good switch. Thank you. Excellent. Does that help, Dr. Hadley?
Yeah, yes. Mark, do you have anything just regarding this? So do we feel as if there's enough to some point take it to back to the board?
I do.
Does it go to the board first?
Yes.
Who then votes to say that this should go to the policy committee? Okay.
The board needs to charge the policy committee with this work. I think that's good. with those changes, we can put that together to take to the full board.
Is there anything like, I know that we didn't want to get into specifics around some of this stuff, but is there, I mean, we've been making some changes around the edges around like board meeting time stuff like that. Are we revisiting some of that stuff as part of this, as part of policy, or like what level of detail is the policy committee going to be getting into?
So the thing that comes closest to that is really defining responsibilities and expectations for communications in here. So I think that might be one of the discussions to have. If it's not delineated in another section, do they want to use that as given? It might be that the policy committee or the board members, general board members feel as if we should go down like be more inclusive, like those types of comments, those types of suggestions. This probably doesn't the way it's framed, but it doesn't preclude it happening and being added in if this group, the policy committee and or the remaining board members feel it should be.
I think that of the policies that we have been reviewing and updating recently, we wouldn't likely be going back in and changing them unless there's something that doesn't work together anymore. If there are policies that we feel cover some of this sufficiently, we might recommend that we let that be covered in existing policy number whatever and take up the rest of the work in a new policy draft. We do have policies that kind of reference one another, certainly at times. And also policies, obviously, that work together, whether or not they specifically reference one another. But that'll be part of the work, I think, of the policy committee to inventory kind of any of this that's covered. Is it covered sufficiently and will it work together?
Yeah, I was just thinking, is there going to be potentially some feedback loop or iteration where like, they're like, well, we don't know, we need input from you to
Mhm.
make this change or figure out what to do here. I don't know.
And if that happens, we'll
we'll
come
just
back
have
to
to
the full
revisit.
board to figure out the next steps from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, Julie, just, I mean, that what comes to mind is the policy we we're just discussing it, which had public comment
Right.
kind of encompassed in it. And I'm just looking again at like the New Canaan example. These are policies that are community relations, communications with the public, which I think by nature are a little bit more general and broad. And then leaving it up to the board policy, the 9,000s that are more of the bylaws to talk about, okay, what is the nature of public comment? What are the rules around that? And I agree with you. I think that hopefully would not change, but these would be more of a general kind of a guidance of what our goals are for communication.
Right.
And
To make those
facilitate.
clear. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I think the other thing that I would ask of the policy committee is that we identify where not only the general policies, but are there specific policies that are missing? And we've talked about some of this here at the table. Like, are there things we need to regulate around use of social media and things like that from our staff? So we've got some bylaws, but I think there are probably some gaps that this committee could contemplate whether or not we feel we're adequately covered when we get to more of the operational stage of discussing how communications work.
So we don't want to dive into that yet, you're saying that's.
I don't know if you need to necessarily, it's up
Right.
to you, but I think that would be another role of the policy committee.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Excellent. Food discussion.
So the feedback from the focus groups, we felt fell into a couple of just descriptors for convenience purposes. And we listed them there. Why are we communicating? How do we communicate? What do we communicate about? Who's communicating? And it's sort of that leans into helping the communications plan to be finalized for the fall. So a couple of these were takeaways, and thank you again for members around the table here who provided succinct feedback on what they thought they heard. And so hopefully you sort of see it here. Why are we communicating? We basically, for that one, the communications, the purpose and the charge of the actual committee itself, when it was set up, I thought, I'm going to put those down there anyway, because those, if they're going to be over, if that's not why we're communicating, then that's okay, you can change it. But that was the purpose of the committee itself, and it sort of spoke to those issues. So that's kind of why they landed there. How did we communicate? There were some takeaways. These are abbreviated from people's feedback, right? That's really just cutting through the chase here a wee bit. The district website, that seemed to be a consistent need for continual improvement. That was the sentiment. Ashman, there was sentiments from community members, board members, staff, that should be replaced. Email, other than trying to make downloads and the inconvenience of that and sometimes on the mobile device of it. But in general, people felt that email was the preferred form in general.
Dr. Adler, just to point out, I think you meant prefer no downloads.
Yes. Oh, yeah, well,
Maybe in all caps.
sorry about that. No downloads.
Tough spot for a typo. but
All
we
right,
get it.
thank you very much. Face-to-face, increase those opportunities. We have that really in the guided documents as well. Social media, like this is our takeaway from it and from your takeaway too. That the community didn't feel that we should replace everything with social media. And they weren't actually desiring much more of it, if any, to be honest with you. That was our takeaway. We can change that, but that was our takeaway.
Dr. Adler, just one point I had on the face-to-face kind of increasing opportunities. I have heard feedback from parents that are disappointed that many of the face-to-face opportunities are taking place during the day. So for working parents, they would like to have some that are in the evenings so that they can also attend these. And this goes to, panels, mental health, kind of parent, webinar. I mean, all of the different things that happen. And so I think that's something we should be doing
The
better.
timing is, yes,
Yeah.
that's a regular one. You're right. That's.
And
good to-
also not on the same day for every kind of thing. So sometimes everything will be happening on a Tuesday morning. So a parent that might have a conflict on Tuesdays would never be able to attend. So I think we need to just try to be a little bit, offer more options.
It does raise a question around like the availability of the Zoom. Because it does create kind of a cop-out mechanism where if you really want to be there, you really want to be face-to-face, well, I've got a Zoom. I can schedule at a time that's probably less convenient for everybody, but more people can join via Zoom versus now everyone can join face-to-face. Just, I think as we're thinking about scheduling and stuff, that should be.
We're faced with that all the time. Actually, if we bring someone, I don't know, let's say some special parent presentation on technologies like that. Well, do we allow it to be Zoom? People want it to be recorded because they can't attend it, but then it reduces probably the effectiveness of it. The fact we're bringing someone. So we struggle with that, to be honest with you. We try to thread that needle. I'm not. I'd be curious of what the way people think it's threaded. Is it leaning towards one side or the other? But at the moment, we have both operating as best we can because there's a lot of people will say, "Is that being recorded? Is it? We'll have an opportunity." Trying to be responsive to it, and I don't know if we're being responsive to it, and therefore responsive to nobody. I honestly can't say whether we've hit the sweet spot, the Goldilocks effect spot or not on that.
It's hard. I mean, we've seen that for years. And people's schedules haven't gotten any easier to work with in their own lives and as it relates to making them work with what I think the district and the schools are trying to do. I do think a piece of this comes back again to making sure that people understand where they can find the information about when these things are happening or where they're available after the fact, because we definitely, we'll get communications from people saying, there's been nothing about X, Y, or Z. And in fact, there has been a very robust, presentation, an expert brought in, et cetera, on the topic. And folks don't know where to go to find the recording of that, or they missed the announcement that it was happening. So as we, work to beef up our communications, making sure that, and again, I think the website will be a big piece of that when we can get to it. I think we can help with some of that. And varying the schedule of things, the scheduling of things is, I think, also.
And I also think recordings are really helpful. And so parents may have legitimate reasons they cannot attend, but when we are able to do a recording, that's a great kind of way to share information with parents too.
I think you could bifurcate between recordings and Zoom. I don't think those are kind of two different things in my head. And in fact, I think, Dr. Riley, when you mentioned before, I was actually surprised. I didn't realize that most of or none of the other schools in the district are actually using Zoom anymore.
Schools, not in our district, outside of our district. you mean?
Boards of education.
Or for boards,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was the case.
A lot of them just transition that back out again.
Yeah.
Did you have something, Jill?
Yeah, to that end of sort of in the how do we communicate, I would suggest that recordings, whether we call it YouTube or recordings or what have you, is actually a pretty powerful way that we
Yes.
communicate out and may need to be noted here.
That's a
I
good
think we
point.
might also want to specifically indicate however we describe Zoom, but that we do have a hybrid approach, because we communicate by being both in person and, what's the word? Not in person,
Virtual.
remote,
Yeah,
virtual.
remote.
And I understand that we're trying to distill from the survey, but I think if we're talking about how we communicate, those two things are important components.
Mhm. I
Yeah,
now
but-
get live YouTube notifications when a meeting is starting. I'm actually not certain how I got signed up for that, but that's the kind of thing that people might like to know.
I
so
don't
they
know,
can-
we're certain about how you did it.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that happened, but if I could figure it out, it might be helpful. Yes,
Just,
Robin.
one other point of feedback that I had heard, just from some focus group participants that they would have liked to have been notified when we were talking about the feedback from the focus groups. And I guess, we post meetings with an agenda, but in this particular case, I think some of the parents who took the time to participate would have liked to have been notified, okay, the
So,
communications
all right.
meeting will be talking about this at this date or.
So you have to help me here, other than perhaps a recognition to anybody who's on every committee that we actually, which may be necessary. And I don't want to get defensive about it, but
I
if
understand.
if I write this on the Friday updates that I give, that the committee is meeting next week to discuss it. Here's the link to the last meeting that was discussed. You actually have the meeting here as follow. There comes a point, I mean, I don't know what the point is, but it's like saturation
And that was
here.
done, is what you're saying.
Yes,
No,
I mean,
yeah.
unless you feel that you
Or
did-
maybe the focus group itself should have had at the end, we will be talking about these results at X date, or I don't know. It's hard to, I understand because we have so many meetings.
Listen, there may be a simple recognition to all the participants. That's fine. We can always.
I just wanted to give feedback
Yeah.
because that was a point that we've
Yeah.
heard from some parents.
And we have said it here, but I will say it again, that we do absolutely appreciate those who participated in the survey and the focus groups,
Right.
all of the
There-
stakeholder
there's one
groups
right
that
here.
participated.
Who's actually coming back to hear about it? So that's great. That's the way it should work.
Uh, I'm going to ask you to save that for public comment if you would, because I want to make sure it gets captured on the record. Thank you.
But it is a good point, right? What Dr. Hadley is saying, what Robin is saying, just in terms of like, and I've made the point before as well, like, we do have so many meetings. There's on average more than one meeting a week. So if you're not, if you're not Dr. Hadley and you're not living and breathing that basically on a day-to-day basis, it's nearly impossible to be like, I'm only looking for this one particular place of interest. How am I going to sort through all this other stuff to find it?
Right.
And that's not a fault to Dr.
No, that's
Hadley.
not right.
That's a fault, I think, to just the meeting cadence
Yes.
and the amount of information. And that's where I was saying, like, from a communications perspective, I think we need to revisit that.
Yes. And you said it earlier and you said it well, that more is not necessarily more. And that's
Yeah.
something we need to be careful of because things do get lost. And that I think simplifying and clarifying is key in this work.
Where did we leave off? Okay, we left off, how do we communicate?
Yeah.
What do we communicate about? So people felt that we need to recognize more of the good things that are happening around the district and with staff and students and celebrations. And I think we've recognized that we need to recognize that and continue to do that. The transparency again came across. Curriculum and both of these topics, communication on difficult, sensitive topics, whatever you want to call them. Curriculum in general, that people felt that we need more outreach on communication regarding curriculum items. And then I didn't leave the next bullet in within curriculum. I just separated that, call them difficult topics, contemporary topics, sensitive topics. I think we know it when we see it. So I think that was part of the feedback from the group. That's always an interesting one. When do you jump into that and when do you not? We have a topic right now, for instance, that the district is wrestling with. We can't just call meetings to have discussions about that. So but that's not necessarily the same as if it's about controversy, right? So those types of things were highlighted, whether they should be, shouldn't be, or otherwise they come out like that. Expectations and frequency for communications, sort of some guardrails, general, what they expect from schools, board, central services, or whatever, superintendent, just what does that mean? Unless you feel differently, the surveys, the feedback, the focus groups in general thought that there was a high degree of communications that we do well, actually, and there was a level of satisfaction. Roles and responsibilities of board members and individual members.
Bradley,
Yes.
can we talk about what we communicate about first
Oh,
before
yeah,
we
yeah,
go
sure,
on to
sure,
the
yeah.
next?
Yeah. They're not straight, they're not.
One thing that in terms of curriculum, for instance, where we say seeking more opportunities, obviously we have a curriculum committee. Maybe we need to also just make sure that the public is aware of that and that if they're interested in those, they can, tune in or watch the Zoom or, but also, the fact that we are all now, and this will be a while, I think, in the coming, but the EduPlanet data and that migration to that platform.
Yep.
The end goal, I believe, is that parents would be able to access the details of the curriculum within that portal, which I think would also go a long way to answering a lot of questions that people might have about, what is being taught in these specific courses, and that hopefully at some point would be able to be either linked into the website or something, because right now I think parents have a hard time finding where they can think about or find anything specific to curriculum or, and it's difficult on the website. And at least when I've tried to find things, it's just not necessarily there or what I'm looking for.
Right.
So EduPlanet is something we don't really even talk about that much, but I think the end goal of that and that whole thing that we're doing and that, we're spending a lot of time on, hopefully we'll achieve some of this transparency.
And the EduPlanet is just, it's not even an end goal. It should be, because we're not like waiting till 2 years from now.
I understand. I
Right,
misspoke.
right. No, but it just, one of the goals, yes, is for parents to be able to see what's the curriculum, what are we doing right? Not, I will say it might run the risk of not at the fine granular level that maybe some people are looking for, right? So, but there is a general, you will be able to go there in many cases you can right now and look at what are these units, and so that the parents have an overview of the curriculum K through 12 on every discipline and every level.
But I think people don't know about that right now. So again, this is, how can we educate and help people
Yeah.
learn how to access that
And that could be,
information?
that could be part of the outcome of.
Yeah.
I think also there's an opportunity to help people understand more easily what's coming up in some of those discussions. Like, I'm making this up next week at curriculum, we're talking about math and SEL. If we could promo a meeting that way so that people know easily what the topics are. I know for myself, if I'm looking to find when we last discussed board goals and objectives, I have to open all the agendas and scroll through them in order to find that, it's time consuming. So if there's a way to inventory more easily what's coming and what's happened and is available to be watched or followed up on after the fact, I think that would go a long way, because I also think that there's a ton of good work that's out there. And I just want us to be very conscious to not fall into the trap of, in addition to the curriculum meetings and the very robust presentations that department chairs and subject matter experts come in and do, we then also want them to write a newsletter and publish that. I don't want to just do more and more and more. I think we should be trying to make more of what we're doing and doing well.
And I would just add a couple other things, just in terms of, I think there's a lack of understanding generally across the community in terms of like what the board's responsibility is versus Dr. Adley and the administration as it relates to some of these things, like in particular around like just using as example curriculum and some of the other topics to sure. Just like, I think if there was a little bit more clarity for the public around, like, here's how it works, right? There's a curriculum that is created. That curriculum is approved by the Board of Education. Here are the parameters around what happens if a teacher, if a faculty member, if something happens where they go outside of the approved curriculum that was approved by the Board of Ed, like, what are the repercussions? What are the steps? Like, how does that actually work? I think it would alleviate some of these, the flurry of emails and questions that probably you get, Dr. Hadley, that I know the board members get whenever there's one of these topics that comes up.
Did you have some?
Well, I didn't mean to flag it, but actually I do have a thought. I told you this, Julie, but I went to Wilton to present an award on behalf of Kate. And the Wilton board chair has a very nice sort of a little bit longer than what we do when we queue up public comment. Cass does a beautiful job, but she actually explains the kind of how public comment gets handled, what you can do to get a question answered. It's a little more extensive. I was thinking as I'm listening to you guys talk, if we look at the last curriculum decision around the accelerated and honors 8th and 9th grade, there were actually 4 curriculum meetings that led up to that decision. But there'd be no way even we would even struggle with reconstructing each of those 4. And certainly it's a lot to expect a member of the public to do that. So I think there's multiple layers of this. How we organize board information and how people find it, that's, I think, big and complex, but something that we should look at bigger picture. I think smaller term, we can use, whether it's a committee chair who's opening up a committee and talks about, this is what's this week, this is what's next week. Here are the meetings that led up to this decision. I think we can be talking more, helping with that. Here's the purpose of this committee. We can use more preposition, even though it takes a little time, as long as we try to be tight on it as board members in those respective roles. So Julie can say, committee met, we talked about these policies, we're going to be talking about it again next time. We think that, I'm making this is silly, but let's use a little more preposition when we give our board committee reports and help guide the community to how we're working. And I can take that on too.
But I don't think that's silly at all. I know, Jill, you and I have talked about this just in terms of like, we do board meetings. There's a whole bunch of good questions that get asked. There's a whole bunch of follow-up topics, but there's not like a central database. Like, I know, like, I do deals for my job. We do acquisitions and we do lots of them at the same time. And the only way to make sure that things get done is to have a running tracker of, here are all the different things that have to get done. Here's who's responsible. Here's the timeline. Here's the follow-up. And we as a board, I think we just don't do that. Like, when we look at the minutes that we approve every week have no information in them. There's like basically nothing in them. So I don't know what the right way to do that is, but I think that like some form of a tracker to make sure that things are getting done might be a good, and then members of the public, if they have access to that, they can just look and say, oh, here's the last time it was discussed, or here's when it was discussed. Here's the follow-up. Here's where it stands. And here's the different places we can go to learn more.
Even in the simplest sense, even if pinned on our website somewhere, you could always get to the master board agenda. So you could
Yeah.
look, but you have to go into a packet from the last
Right.
meeting where we discussed it in order to find it, which ain't easy. And so, that's even just a simple way for someone to say, oh, look, they're coming back to talk about, security again and.
Yeah.
and
Yes.
I
ask
think
you
that
what's
would
done.
help, even board members.
It
Because
would.
if you
it would
had
help
that,
me.
then we know what date to go to get them, right, that's right, that would be really helpful.
And I think in an ideal world, we would have the master agenda with hyperlinks to the right
Mhm.
data. But the other thing, if this committee maybe could take up next month, is what are the standard board deliverables that should always be available and have their own hyperlink that's immediate. One is the master agenda, another is the goals and objectives for the year. And we have a whole page for budget, so that's great. But I think that I would love to see this board, or excuse me, this committee recommend just a list of, I don't know if it's 5 or 6 documents, but the key ones that everybody should be able to get to at all times. Subcommittee meetings, we don't have that posted. Some of those things would be easy wins for all of us to manage better.
I think we could do that.
Actually, this is the grab which says that there's just nuances to all of those things, right?
Of course.
It's just like,
Of course.
you just follow the thread and like it goes like everywhere, but I think, but it's hard to make sure we're all on the same page of what we actually understand, what all those things mean, but
Yep.
please, I think just continue to like try to put clarity around those words because it's helpful. If we can describe it and talk about it, then we may be able to do it.
Right.
But if we don't know what it is we're trying to do, then we certainly can't.
Yeah, and I think just to make it very simple, to your point, Dr. Adley, we don't want to create a lot more work, but Julie and Jill's point about just even on the Board of Ed page at the very top, here's the link to the strategic plan, here's the link to the master calendar, here's the link to the committee dates, just so the public could be able to say that, and then if you have a hyperlink then to, you know, that specific date in the materials, that would make it so much easier for people to quickly kind of find exactly what they were looking for. And then what is being, and at least then they can see the agenda. The issue is that the agenda itself is not searchable by topic. And, you know, if they want to know when XYZ was discussed during the course of a curriculum meeting year, that is a difficult thing to find. And I don't have an easy solution for that. And we think.
Oh, and our search engine on the website for those things is not great.
No.
To say the least.
Dr. Adley, did you want to discuss the concept of transparency here? Jill, I definitely understood and appreciate how you were describing it in terms of the policy direction. But I think there was a question here about what do we think was meant by this more so than what do we think it should mean? Does that make sense? As we
Yeah,
try to
I'm just
interpret
trying to-
survey and focus group
Yeah,
feedback.
I'm just trying to get a wee work of knowledge of what we understand that to be. I will say, since we're an open communication, we're talking about difficult topics and so on. Not to go back to that topic, but and it's just sure pragmatically, like it's a conversational issue with you in terms of, it's not necessarily a weakness. It's just like, sometimes I wonder like, when's the best time to do that? And what's the most beneficial thing to do for the district? Right? I fluctuate between 5 people, 12 people, 2 people, 3 people to email the board. Now do I call a meeting with all those people? Because they have their topic of like, what's the tipping point? What's the most helpful forum so that it doesn't become like a crazy event, this sort of thing, right? And there's positivity to it and how you create it. So I just, for anybody listening and anybody here, I don't want people to think that I'm just being obstinate about these things or like silence is just like deafening or as a tactic. It's just, it's not an easy thing. I just want to share that with you, like, as to when you sort of, okay, I'm going to call a meeting right now for the community and let them know, let them see. We have a couple of principals that, who are not returning. Let's have a forum about that, about like, let's have a forum, a community forum about talking about all that. Or some other topic, books or something, right? It's just, I'm just sharing with you that it's just not an easy, whether I'm doing it well, bad, something in between. Those are things I wrestle with. Both the transparency of it, the timing of it, what's right for the district, what's right. So anyway, just, why am I saying that? I don't know. I'm just giving you a wee window. I don't want.
Just to add to that too, Dr. Adley, sometimes with a sensitive subject where there's limited information you're able to provide, but you feel compelled to communicate something because you're hearing from the public
Right.
on the topic, it then becomes complicated because to try to communicate broadly on the subject, you're not able to say too much, and you're also talking to a very big audience that has varying degrees of information on the topic. Some people might not have any idea what's being discussed when a message comes out, and that raises even more questions at that point. So it's tricky to figure out what the right balance is.
Well, the good news is we're trying to work through it here. So
Yes.
I found that there's lots of inbound stuff like that. And it's not on one specific item, because you're managing a lot, right? There's a lot of email traffic that's probably headed toward in your direction. And I don't know if you have to manage your email yourself or if you have help doing that. I think you have help doing that. I think that the best way to do that is just a very quick response. We hear you, we understand your concern. We will look into it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And that will alleviate immediately that whoever the person that's reaching out is concerned, at least for the time being. And then there's the decision point that you're talking about, which I think there may be some framework that needs to be provided to you. I don't know if it's by us or by the board more broadly, just in terms of like, when does it need to be elevated? What's the scope where it requires that elevation? Because I do think like if it's two people that reach out to, but it's a really sensitive topic and then you bring it up to the whole community, but there's a lack of
Right,
information,
right.
like you're potentially creating an issue
Correct, right.
that you don't want to create. So there definitely are sensitivities around
Yeah,
that.
thanks.
Just one question. Do other districts have a communications director that would also handle public relations and like publicity and PR? Because this ultimately is also a crisis management PR kind of role that people have an expertise in. And including just district communications.
Some districts do have, some districts have a half-time person. Yes, there are some districts who have communications. There's
Just something to
there's my
think about.
communications person right there.
Which is just a question.
No. The town has a half-time communications person.
I would remove transparency from this list. I don't think we communicate about transparency. I
Right.
think transparency is the modality, right? That's what we're
right,
trying
yeah,
to achieve.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
We already have it anyway.
yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Right.
I think you were trying to capture the themes that came out of the discussion, but yes,
Okay.
I also agree. I agree with both of you. I think we should remove it because that's what this exercise is all about, but that's not what the output is.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, the why you've answered with our those three. Sorry, Julie.
Yes, with the committee's purpose, the committee's objectives. So I think it should be built in, embedded in that, but, it's a bit of a buzzword, transparency. I think it's what we want. I don't know that it's how we want to describe it. Let's do it. Let's not say it, so to speak. And that's what all of this work is intended to get to as best we can. We're already.
So are we saying that the part of the purpose of why we are communicating transparency would be up in that initial bucket?
We're saying that the concept is covered in that initial bucket and that
Is
we're taking the word out.
Okay.
Yes, because by aligning with all of our guiding documents, et cetera, we are certainly intending to provide honest, timely, comprehensive, relevant, all of those concepts are built in, which get to transparency. And transparency, I think, is one of those loaded words that we're better served to not really rely on, to just have it. Well, we're going to be transparent. We're just not going to tell you we're transparent.
But
Okay.
and sometimes we're not allowed to be transparent.
Well, exactly.
So it can't be always.
Right. We'll transparently tell you that we're not able to tell you more in some cases. Does that make sense, Alan?
Yep, good.
All right, so does that move us on to who?
Well, similarly, some things here maybe don't really apply, particularly the first bullet, but that was one of the takeaways that.
So I had a question about the first bullet because I did not get a sense from the survey results that we have a high degree of satisfaction with communications, but maybe they had a high degree of satisfaction with the emails and the weekly updates, but just the survey, the detailed feedback, and this is maybe not the focus group feedback as much as the survey feedback. I just put a question mark next to it.
So we took this from the focus group questions, and we're happy to bring it back if you want to look at the data or something, or I'm happy to listen. How would you characterize it if it's not that? But we looked at the data from community and so on when they did the surveys and the level of, are you satisfied with it?
Right.
Stats, so to speak, out of the
But-
survey.
But again, that did not include level of like satisfaction, the staff piece was missing. So there were some pieces, I think we're working on that as part of the overall
The
communication.
staff patient wasn't missing from the survey.
This level of satisfaction with communications with staff was not a question that was asked. It was the level of communications effectiveness of the, you know, Board of Ed and with the administration.
Oh, no, I'm just talking about the staff themselves, or administrative survey,
Oh,
which we asked them, are you satisfied with? I'm just talking about,
right.
like, the community was given one, the board was given one, staff were given one.
I would just tweak the language to say high degree of satisfaction with certain elements of communication,
fine.
because it's probably not everything, and there's clearly areas to work on.
Agreed.
So this really just speaks to, like, who is communicating and defining, like, the expectations around that. The communications plan to some degree will do that for the staff. And we can continue to talk about the board. And I noted there, you know, like, again, certain constituents, certain members of the constituents, I think it'd be disingenuous if I didn't say, don't feel hurt, because it's like a colloquial thing that comes up. And it comes up in these discussions, and trying to respond to it. We should try and respond to it, whatever that means. If it's finding out more about it, that's one thing. If it's okay, we know what it means, and let's create opportunities where they should be heard. But that's the overall goal of it anyway, I think.
Just one question, in the policy itself, when that policy gets written, I would want the roles and responsibilities of board, and especially with the view of like communications, I think it would be helpful to have that outlined, because I know the Fairfield policy mentioned that the board chair is the primary spokesperson to, you know, for external kind of communications, and same thing with the superintendent for anything that's involving district and operations. So I think having that actually in the policy itself would be helpful to delineate.
So that's one that does exist, an existing policy. So that might
does,
either be
okay.
one you know, a case where we would reference,
Okay.
or if a policy can decide. Again, we do sometimes repeat things, I think, in policies. Marge, is that fair to say?
Mhm.
Yeah, so one policy will repeat something from another policy. So as they work on crafting something there, they might look at that, but it's a fair point. Yeah. Responsibilities of building level staff. Alan, where were we going with that?
Well, that's just there was indications that just
Like the weekly news, that kind of.
yes, what is the expectation there? Is there a general thing about it? Consistency between the buildings, both at a staff level of what they hear from
Right.
it wasn't also the community, what in general, I don't want to lock them down, okay? But in general, what would they expect from?
Right. So that
So that's
all of staff feels that they're getting communicated with similarly, and that all, you know, whatever building your family may be a part of,
For the most
you're
part.
getting a comparable level of communication, even though it might not be the exact same method or vehicles.
For the most part, yes. And then just how are we talking about the regular sort of communications to expect?
Okay. Any more questions there, or should we talk about where we're going next?
Sure. If you want to have a suggestion of where to go next and how to pull this together, well, one, we'll talk about the policy thing. So do you want the board to review this at May 28th? I don't know that I don't think a policy meeting is going to meet before I get confused about my policy committee and this committee. I don't think, do we have a policy committee come up? I don't think
we do.
I don't think we have. So the question is, do you want to kick that or schedule that for the start of the year? As this will be going to the board to charge the policy committee. I'm not sure the policy committee I don't think the policy is going to start to meet on this policy now. I don't think, but help me, right? I would probably think we would defer that discussion to start of the year, or in consultation with the board chair as to where to schedule it. But
Board chair would like this ready to go from the beginning of the school year. I think it's a great time to start with a new communications philosophy. So if we have to add meetings, then let's do it. Sorry to add, but I think.
well, that's okay.
I
That's why I'm
think it's a great
asking.
thing to start the year with.
Okay, so
So we could then prime it up on the 28th with this discussion. Is that okay?
Yep.
But if
And
we're
would-
gonna add it to the 28th, my recommendation would be we make whatever changes to this that we're gonna make, get it out. I don't know, later today, send it to the board and say, please provide feedback in advance of the 28th. And then it's gonna be a 2-minute conversation on the 28th as opposed to a 20-minute conversation.
Yes. And or make it a first
Amen to
read
that.
for the 28th and revisit it at the
To me,
next
that's how
meeting.
every single topic should go with the board, but I think we need to work to get there.
Okay, good.
Does that work?
I don't think that there's too much. I don't think you want me sending these, I don't think so, these sample policies or anything to them. We'll just do a memo and just, right?
I might include the few
I think it would
policies
be
that you had
helpful.
attached to today's.
All right, so
packet.
Yeah, it makes it more
Just
concrete.
to give them
Yeah.
the scope of it?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, okay. All right.
Because-
Well, that's why I kept them on anyway, so.
To give them the scope and the level of it that we're thinking at this point,
Right.
because we don't want
Okay.
folks to feel like they're looking for who's going to answer, the
Working
very
from
detailed
scratch.
bylaw
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I
But
think that
is
would be
this
helpful.
agenda item for the board to vote on taking this to the policy committee? That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then that's what we shall do. So thereafter, communications expert who's over my shoulder here, I propose working with Marge and Cassie here to put together something over the summer to bring back in a sort of like the documents we've seen from Easton and Oxford, a little bit, try to frame it, pull it, polish it up, put some strategies and actions to it.
Are you talking about creating a communications plan?
Well, that is part of what we have to do in terms of, because we have the essence of that. But put together our thinking in a coherent, documented way, that sort of polishes this up a little bit, completes the process. If anybody was part of that particular process, they could look at this, they could lift this document and look at what we came up with, the strategies around it, the implementation of around it.
So key findings, strategies, objectives.
You'd have to agree to what it is, but
Right.
that's what,
You mentioned Easton or some other district. Did they have something that was more of a,
way back at the
Plan.
start, we looked at the
Oh.
communications plan from these districts.
I think I missed that.
Um,
Okay.
I can send you some of that.
Yeah, that would be helpful to see, actually. That would be.
Marge, can you send those,
Yeah.
Robin?
Actually, we can send them to you anyway, because I'm talking in a wee bit nervously if you haven't seen them. I mean, just to sort of share. And I actually will maybe talk to the superintendent up there and ask them, do you mind if I model around the same type of structure? Because I thought it was well done.
Okay.
Okay, so we have talked about this, but that's the way we would propose to bring back a completed document and for further discussion.
For start of the school year?
Yeah.
Okay. And then where does that work with so then our communications plan, we're looking to have by fall of 2024. So if we review something as the year begins, then we'll have time to adjust, revise, get
Right.
the committee on board.
I would say that if the policy stuff has moved on, I don't think you need to meet until we have this ready. If it's not the first meeting, just for the start of school or something, unless something comes up from it, right? I don't know that we come back to,
Sure.
because the agenda would be to review that primarily, unless you've got something else.
And just a question on that communications plan, is that going to then include a lot of the detail and the action items? Because we haven't, I know we gave maybe some proposals in writing to you, but is that your intent?
So our intent would be to bring it all sort of rounded up. If you look at the sort of visual of the communications plan that was proposed, it will look something like that, but also with strategies around these
Okay.
things.
And then we would be having further discussion on what those strategies
Yeah,
are or
yeah.
in
Well-
detail, or how does that work?
Well, I think I'd bring it back as a proposal to you if you like them, fine.
Great,
If you
okay.
think
Right.
if you think it misrepresents what has been said here, that's
Okay.
okay too. I just think we need to now
Great.
pull it all together.
Put it all together and wrap it up with
Okay.
a bow that can be untied and discussed.
It'd
The,
be nice if the communications committee develops a communication, like something comprehensive or
Mhm.
from our work that we've done.
Right.
Right.
No, I agree, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
That can-
helpful.
makes sense on its own. Alan, could we try to do that for late August as we're coming back to school to have the,
No.
No.
You mean, sorry, the actual completed document?
to get this committee back together to review something? No,
I
it
think
needs
that's
to
gonna be, I think it needs to be the first meeting in September or something that we have. That's what I'm saying. Even that, I want to make, I say the start of the school year, right? I don't want to lock myself in here,
Okay.
or lock Cassie in, or just knowing what we have to do for. I know this summer doesn't seem like a busy time for people, but it is for us in terms of,
That's understood.
I just would ask the consideration of, I'm proposing like what we do, pull it together, but I don't want to lock myself in, like just, our intent would be to have it for the first meeting in September. If we can't, it would definitely be for the second, but we would shoot for the first meeting in September.
And could we, with that layout timing on when any of the topics included might be actionable? Does that make sense? Obviously, even if we met in August, we're not going to suddenly be able to put everything into action
Right.
for the first day of school. I appreciate that certainly, but it would be helpful when we review it to get an idea of how massive an undertaking certain things might, am I making sense? I think you probably get what I'm saying.
I totally get what you're saying, and I totally know what I have to do with it. I just
Okay.
don't have the answer
Okay.
to it. I mean, my intent would be to do that.
Okay.
Something that you could help us with a little bit, just as you're thinking. It goes back to a question Greg asks regularly, and it's a fair question. What would be the metric for this? I haven't set up, there's no metric for this at the minute that we have to find, so to speak. So just ponder that, because that would be helpful too, right? To
Number of inbound emails you receive.
there you go. There you go.
And then another item that we had talked about earlier in our discussion today was a list of documents, key documents that we as board members and this committee members think would be helpful to have more easily findable.
Now that's a separate thing.
Right, but perhaps we do that via email, put a list together and share that information with you just over the next few weeks, just so people have that. If it's something they can act on, great. If not, it informs what we're doing for the future.
Could also just build that into May 28th too for the board if you want to share that with them. I don't know if that's too
And ask
much.
people to add to that.
I mean, that can be added as a memo if there's documents that they can't get their hands on or things or.
I think that's fine. I think we
We
should,
already kind of did a pretty quick list of a lot of them right now, right?
right.
But
I think it's a pretty easy task, right? I don't know. Maybe we don't. Let's just leave
No,
the
okay.
the full
I'll
board
leave it- I'll
discussion
leave
on the
it- I'll leave it
policy
then.
topic.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, if the members of this committee, if they want to.
Yeah.
Good.
We can get that together pretty easy.
I
Okay,
could reach out to other board members.
Yeah.
In that capacity too.
Yep. Good call. Okay, anyone have anything else?
Good discussion, helpful discussion.
Good working committee. Okay, shall we move to public comment? Cass, please.
Good morning. If anyone in person would like to participate in public comment, please approach the podium and wait for the chair to recognize you. Please state your name and address for the record, and you will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Please note the time with the chair. Laura Pesh Gray, is this on?
Yes,
Yeah,
Laura,
you're
yeah.
good.
11 Parsons Walk. I wasn't prepared to speak today, so I'm just going to speak off the top of my head. I was part of the focus group. I know that it's hard when you're looking at a summary of a focus group to kind of get in the context of what was being discussed in the meeting. I think transparency is a loaded word. I agree. I think that the general sense for the group that I was in was that when there is a sensitive topic, especially when it comes to, the topics of books, why not just address it? To Greg's point, I agree. If you address it to the total community, you may raise issues that were not issues for more people that don't even have it on their radar. But I think that there's something to be said about just saying, listen, here's the book, here's the topic, this is what we're covering. If you don't want your child to read it, and I think that is what the community is looking for, is to just be very direct and transparent. I think there's I think that you're right. People don't know the policies, they don't know the procedures, they don't know how the whole system works. I think that would be extremely beneficial. To Dr. Adley, I don't know how you keep everything. There's so much good stuff that we do here, and nobody knows nobody knows where it is, when it is. I love the idea. You have so many, like, this team is such a great team. You ask such great questions. I think having something on the Board of Ed website on when the next, like, the curriculum meetings, here's the topic. I love that. I mean, I think the community would love that. And I think it's just, creating lists of, I don't know if the last topic that you just mentioned, I was writing notes in my notes. The list of key documents, is that for the community or just for your? That's a question I really have, but I loved all your ideas, and I think that would really be extremely helpful and powerful. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
We have no online participants today,
All righty. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Robin, Greg, all in favor?